John chapter 7, verse 1. That was John chapter 7, verse 1. I guess it's up there on the screen too. We'll go through verse 24 today. But I would like for you to go ahead and turn the picture to the book cover that I had up there. If you guys will see that. Now, if you guys see that book cover, whenever I see the picture, this is what I would start trying to think that the story is probably about. And there's a young knight with some mountains to overcome, and he's probably trying to prove himself as not only a knight but as a man and as a gentleman, maybe conquering some sort of dragons or whatever it might be. But whenever I'm looking at the picture and then you see what the book is actually titled, okay? Can you guys see what the title of the book up there? It's called Frankenstein. Okay. Now, I don't know if you guys know what Frankenstein is, but I think most of you do. It is a very large monster with bolts sticking out of his neck as whatever, and I couldn't even tell you the plot to that story, but I can tell you that it has nothing to do with a knight and a mountain and all of the other things that goes with that. And so that cliche saying of don't judge a book by its cover, quite honestly, I don't know who put that together, but they're not very good at their job. Okay, that's all I would say about that. But you can go ahead and turn from that. But don't judge a book by its cover is a whole idea that we'd be taking into John chapter 7. If you guys just think of that cliche saying for just a second, you guys are going to know that we should not judge by outward appearances only. If you have a first impression of somebody and you have formed an opinion very quickly and it turns out to be wrong, well, you really shouldn't be surprised by that. If you guys have ever met somebody for the first time over a phone call, I don't know if you guys do the same thing that I do, but whenever I hear somebody on the phone, I immediately go to put some sort of picture to the face of that person, and then whenever I see it, I have never been right. Okay? They never look the way that I pictured them, and I don't know why that is at all, but it just doesn't work. Or whenever we're just kind of thinking about new experiences, and a lot of times whenever we're about to start that new experience, you and I probably are going through, if we have any time to think about it, we're going through and telling ourselves, this is what it's going to be like. You know, like marriage. It's like we are going to be happy all the time, and you look at it through these rose-colored glasses just to find out that marriage is work, and there's no other way to describe that, right? You're almost. It seems like almost every couple is very rudely awakened at some point. Sarah told me on our honeymoon, I had no idea that you were that weird. Okay, I said, well, it's too late now. They already turned in the marriage license, right? Or for all of these teenagers and these 20-year-olds right now, that after I broke 30, they act like I already got one foot in the grave. Okay, that was their thoughts. That was my thoughts. Okay, but to be completely honest, this is my favorite age so far. I said, so far, life just continues to get better. So whatever the preconceived expectations are, preconceived notions, preconceived whatever. It's almost as if that we're looking at somebody who made a really bad book cover, and then we're beginning to make the story. We're trying to decide what's in the story before we even read the contents. And so in John chapter 7, you guys kind of think about the context of where we have been with John. Jesus has came into the world, and he is the light shining into the darkness. He's not only this light shining into the darkness, but many people's expectations for what the Messiah was going to be has made them to make a really bad book cover. And so every time Jesus does something that wasn't what they were expecting, it makes them wonder or makes them angry. It creates all sorts of emotion that continuously happens. And really, from John chapter 5, we begin to see this familiar scene of Jesus being the unexpected Messiah, even though everybody's expecting him. And so if you're kind of seeing what they're doing with these preconceived notions or expectations with Jesus, that they have made in their mind a really bad book cover, and every time Jesus goes against their plot for the story, they are practically offended for it. Even his family, starting in chapter 7, we see how they're responding to all the attention Jesus is giving them. If you will look with me now at verse 1. And it says that after this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of the booths was at hand. I do want to stop there for a second and kind of tease out those first two verses of chapter 7. That if you guys remember that at the end of John chapter 6, that there's a lot of disciples, a lot of followers have now left Jesus, because he had made some outrageous things for them to have to live up to. That they were ultimately going to have to surrender their social norms so that they could follow Jesus, and they were unwilling to do so. Again, he's going against the plot that they had written for him. And again, perhaps a little bit overboard, but they were ready to kill him. And so in verse 7, Jesus knows where these people are who are wanting to kill him, and they live in Jerusalem. And the Feast of the Booths, this is another pilgrimage feast where all the Jews are going to travel to Jerusalem. And so if Jesus goes down to Jerusalem, that's where all the hitmen are at, so to speak. Okay? So he has been avoiding Jerusalem, and this has been about 6 months since we last read in John chapter 6. But one of the things that I read whenever I'm just thinking about those two verses is that this is something that we just got through celebrating the resurrection. We just got through talking about Jesus' death, not just to to conquer sin and death, but he did indeed do that. But with every resurrection, of course, there is a death there, is there not? And so, whenever we're thinking about when Jesus is going to die, and how he is going to die, and by whose hands he is going to die, and where he is going to die, let me just kind of reverse back all of those questions. He will die in Jerusalem. By whose hands will he die? Well, he will die by the hands of the Jews as they hand them, as to be sure that they hand him over to the Roman government. And then again, as you're just kind of thinking about all of that setting, it's like, so why is he so afraid to go up there? Well, I really don't think it's out of fear of why he's afraid to go up there. I don't think it's really fear. I really think it's because Jesus lives in the will of the Father. And perhaps it will be by the hands of the Jews that he will die. But it will not be until God says that it's time. Okay? So you and I, whenever we live our lives, whenever we're thinking about our death, if we belong to God, nobody will take our lives until God says that they can take you alive. Jesus will not put himself in a situation for us to compromise. And by the way, he is perfectly safe. Nobody is going to take his life until God allows it to be able to happen. And then at that point, it's really not even by the hands of some other person. For Jesus is not going to be killed by anybody, but he will lay his own life down. Nobody is going to tell him when or how it's going to happen. And so with that, there's kind of the idea is what we're kind of looking forward. But now we just see how his brothers or his family begins to criticize him in verse 3. So his brothers said to him, "Leave here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one works in secret if he seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for not even his brothers believed in him." And we'll stop at verse 5 for now. And so we're kind of thinking about what Jesus is doing and all the things that he has done. All the popularity has now swung from John the Baptist, and they have been following Jesus. And one guy who evidently just doesn't seem to know how to keep followers. He doesn't seem like he really knows how to keep a great crowd following him, because in John chapter 6, he's telling all of them to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And then they say, well, we're not following you anymore. And then he looks at his disciples and says, well, do you want to go too? Okay, do you see how almost deflective that he is? And so now we just kind of see what Jesus' brothers are saying. I don't really know what their motives are for saying it. We could look at them in a really bad light of they're being very critical of the Son of God, and maybe they are. Maybe they're getting really tired of all the extra attention being his brother, okay? And all the things all the attention that he's bringing on their family that just doesn't look real Jewish anymore. It doesn't look very normal anymore. And so they're getting a little bit fed up with all the things that he's been saying and doing. I don't know. Maybe they really want him to succeed. I don't know. All the text gives us is what they give is their essentially their method, their advice, and the criticism that they offer him. Maybe it was constructive criticism. Maybe it wasn't. Okay, but what we see is the method. Okay, you go to the crowds. Go make yourself seen. Even though Jesus has been living 6 months in obscurity. Okay? Their advice is, hey, stop hiding. If you're actually capable of doing this, go to where all of the people are so that they know that you are actually the Messiah. Okay? Their criticism, again, is stop hiding, make yourself known to people, or else this just isn't going to work. If we were to start talking about modern church growth, like really their advice is probably just about as worldly as anything. And really our modern church growth efforts, even though they may be good intentioned, they don't always match what the Lord's methods are. Because his method is to remain in the wilderness, remain in obscurity, remain in the will of God whenever that's where he'll have him to be. Our methods is exposure all the time. Let's throw some money at it. Let's have a big event. Let's do this. Let's do that. We want to see results quickly, and we want to be able to make the most of our time. Now listen, in verse 5, it gives the reason for why they're doing that. Okay? For not even his brothers believed in him. This is where perhaps even family members have criticized. Believers who are doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing. If you have ever had a child who said, I was called to missions, and then to listen to some of their parents say some of the things that they say is about the most ungodly thing that has ever came out of the mouths of people. For it's out of fear from the parents, of course. And I completely understand what they are doing, but it's almost as if they do not believe that the Son of God is the one who is actually calling them to that very calling. And whenever we're thinking about what his brothers are saying there, they do not believe in him as the Son of God and as him living in the will of the Father, so they are going to criticize him whenever he is not doing the things that look normal to them. It's his abnormality is making them uncomfortable, and so therefore they feel the need to probably say something, to push on him, to do whatever it might be. And whenever you and I have been called to the will of God, it will not look normal. And the fact of the matter is that the Church of Jesus Christ has almost become too worldly, looking for quick results, and so therefore we neglect the basic things that Christians are supposed to do, and that is to be in obscurity from time to time, or on a daily basis. A certain portion of our time is to live and abide in the very presence of God himself through prayer and the very Word of God, so that we know how to be able to reach a fallen generation by the Spirit's guidance. Okay? And prayer can never be neglected whenever we're thinking about lost souls. Prayer must be what we begin with, and the obscurity that Jesus chooses, not only is it the will of the Father, but I do feel that God led him there in prayer for him to be able to do that. And so yes, criticized by family, but Jesus has confidence in what? Confidence in his Father and his Father's will. That is going to turn out just fine. And so, in verse 6, this is where he corrects his brothers. In verse 6, he says to them, my time has not yet come, but your time is always here. His time for what? Well, a couple of things probably. The very first thing is, my time to die isn't yet here. You guys quit trying to push me into death, okay? So I'm not ready for it. God's not ready for it. You don't need to be ready for it either. It's probably one of the things he's talking about. But also that, what if we're thinking day to day? And when we go to this place or that place to show up late, maybe you guys could try this excuse at some point. My time has not yet come to go up to the feast. Okay? It's like, and you can say, well, that's the reason why I show up late to everywhere. My time just hasn't yet came. And so that's why I'm late. Okay? That's probably not going to work with your job or whatever it might be. But this is what Jesus knows for a fact. My time is not yet here. But your time is always here. And so in verse 7, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify about it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I am not going up to this feast, for my time is not yet fully come. And after this saying, he remained in Galilee. So we stop there and we just think about verse 7. This is the correction to his brothers. That yes, I'm living in the will of the Father, but the correction is that the world can't hate you if you continue to just live normally. And this is where he's coming from all this. The world will not hate you because you're living just like they are. And he says, but whenever I have came into the world, and we can go back into the early part of John, that I am the light shining into the darkness. And so whenever we're just thinking about how Christ is coming into the darkness, is that not only is he calling you to follow him with everything you have, but his divine standards of how we follow him is essentially what is deflecting everybody from desiring to be his followers. And so just in John chapter 6, what he was talking about is that whenever you are to eat my flesh and to drink my blood, is that you are ultimately going to die to your flesh in order for you to be able to follow me. You're going to set aside these worldly pursuits so that you will be in my will and whatever it might be. And they said, that ain't worth it. And the fact of the matter is that if we look at how we typically follow Jesus, we don't typically just set aside our worldly pursuits, but we want to have our worldly pursuits and then also have Jesus and believe everything's okay. And yet Jesus is saying that even the very good intentions of trying to do that for sinful man gets us in trouble almost every single time. And whenever Jesus is laying out that he testifies that our works are evil, that he's going to testify that everyone's works are evil. You guys should know what being offended by Christ feels like. You guys should know what his higher calling and the offense to it feels like, because whenever he has offended your flesh, you should consider yourself in a good place. And this is the reason why. It's because after he has offended you, then he leads you to himself for the very saving of the thing that has offended you. It's almost like he is redirecting your gaze from yourself to him so that you may be able to follow him. And again, he testifies that all of the works are evil. This is the correction. He will not go down until his Father says so. And he will not go down because people want to kill him because they are offended by his very being. Okay? And so now he stays there in verse 9 and verse 10. Now he decides to go up. Okay? And so his time evidently had come in verse 10, but after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private. Here Jesus is moving amongst the crowd incognito. Okay? Evidently none of his disciples are with him at this point. Evidently he's all by himself. Evidently he said he is... maybe he's wearing those ridiculous glasses with a big nose and a big furry mustache so that nobody knows who he is. I don't know, but nobody knows who he is. And so while he is unknown to the crowd and what's going on, he's listening to the critique or the people's opinions about him. In verse 11, the Jews were looking for him at the feast and saying, "Where is he?" And there was much muttering about him among the people. And while some said he is a good man, others said, no, he is leading the people astray. Yet for fear of the Jews, no one spoke openly of him. Okay, I find that verse 13 really interesting. That it has now become very normal to not talk about Jesus in public. Okay, now, you guys know the state of our world and the state of our spiritual our state of our spiritual being inside of our country right now, that there are two things you just don't talk about with people if you want to stay friends with them, is religion and then it's politics, okay? And people are saying, as long as you just let me have my beliefs and you have your beliefs, I'm going to leave you alone, and you just need to leave me alone, which is one of the most incredible assumptions and things to come down to I have ever heard in my life. Okay, it does not smell of Jesus Christ. It smells of a world trying to deflect him. Okay, it is the very idea that, look, I have my opinions based on the book cover that I have created in my own mind. I have no desire to know what the real contents are. Okay, that is the very way of the people in this time, the very way of the people of the United States now. You don't tell me what I will believe or I won't believe. Now listen, whenever we're thinking about the opinions held by everybody, well, he's a good man, all the way to it's like, well, I think he's leading the people astray. If I was to poll all of the United States, we'd probably have everything from this to that. He's a good man to he's the Son of God to he's just leading people astray. Many of people have held these very same opinions that is being displayed in the Scripture. And so how do we handle them as human beings? Well, we handle it in a very cowardly way for fear of being shamed, I'll just remain silent. Now, again, that just isn't right. But it is a natural human tendency, isn't it? And you say, well, it may cost me. It may cost you. You're exactly right, okay? It may cost you something of this world, but it will never cost you something in heaven, will it? Okay? It's like, and so this is where Jesus, how he kind of brings these uncertainties and he resolves them. Okay? And he should be able to resolve them in your own heart as well. If there is this very fear coming up, you don't really know what you think of Jesus, you are actually confused on what you think of Jesus. Again, Jesus can correct you, and he will correct you if you go and read the very contents of his word. Okay? Because this is something that, let's just throw out Donald Trump for a second. If I just took a poll inside of this room right now, again, everything from a good man to he's leading the people astray is probably going to come up, and not a single one of you have met the man. Not a single one of you. And I have really heard him, or heard him speak, and you said, well, I've heard him give many speeches. Well, he's got a lot of speechwriters, okay? Just like every other president in all of history, you don't know the man. You base your feelings on how well you like him or don't like him off of experience or the news outlet that shares the information about him. And if you don't like what that news outlet says, then you change the channel until you find one that says what you want them to say. And so, do you see what you're basing all of that off of? It's your feelings, and wherever the economy is at, if it's helping you, then you probably like him, okay? He can't speak for himself. But the uncertainties about Christ, the book of John over and over and over again gives him an opportunity to tell you exactly who he is. And this is what he does. Jesus speaks for himself so that any false opinions that you may have of him, he will correct them. But again, you don't get that by just reading a book cover. You don't get that by making your own book cover. You don't get that from anything until you actually go and read the very contents of his word. And then he speaks for himself. And there's no other conclusion that you can come up with whenever you're reading the very contents of his word besides this is the Son of God, because he will correct you with truth, which again seems to be offensive to many people. When we see it again in verses 14 through 24. And it says, about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began teaching. He's no longer incognito, but now he is actually teaching. He is actually going up into public and allowing everybody to be able to see him. And this is the response, that the Jews therefore marveled, saying, how is it that this man has learning when he has never studied? Okay, I'll stop there for just a second. There's a lot of people who hold a PhD, who has no wisdom or godly wisdom whatsoever. Okay? For sure, you gain knowledge from study. For sure, you gain knowledge from years of experience. You gain a lot of different things. But the very wisdom of God does not come until one's soul has been broken before God Himself and you have humbly submitted yourself to God. Okay? And so this is what Jesus says in verse 16. So Jesus answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but whose? It is His who sent me." Okay, in verse 17, "If anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own authority." Evidently, every Bible teacher ever who has ever tried to speak on his own authority is an imposter, including Jesus Himself. For whenever Jesus came, He did not speak as one who has created these things, but He is speaking as what He has heard from His Father. He is speaking on the very authority of God Himself. And so whenever He is speaking these things, people are hearing it and recognizing it as what it is or where it came from, as divine wisdom from God. It is this very source of what it is. While we were in Panama, okay, this was about this time last year, Jace Hargrove, I said he was down there with us as well. If you guys know Jace, he's a pastor of FBC Carter. But he was sitting around in a small group one day, and he was talking very proudly that our whole group, that every single person that had came that week had not gone to seminary, which is a school for pastors. Okay. And he was so excited about it and whatever else. Then our friend Chase, he's at Eastside in Elk City, and he said he looked at Jace and said, "Jace, Brandon's gone to seminary." And he looked at me, and if you can hear Jace Hargrove's voice, he's like, "No, you didn't." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I did." and then he says this, because I think he was trying to dig himself out of a hole. He said, "Oh my goodness, you're an educated redneck." I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment or not, Jace, but so it's whatever. But then we went to Providence back in the fall, and I was rooming with Jace, and so he evidently was kind of thinking about seminary or something of the like. I'm not really sure what it all was, and so he asked me again. He's like, "Brandon, what did you get out of seminary that I wouldn't get?" He said, "Not going to seminary." And him asking me as a pastor. And I'll say, as I have a lot of things that I appreciate about my time going to school. It taught me to study. Okay, it said I wasn't very good at it before, but it did teach me to study. It did teach me to read. It did teach me how to depend on God in faith. But the very best thing that it did was that it was just quite simply a tool that God used to break me. Okay, because if I am not broken before Him, then my humility is not coming out whenever I get to preach His word. Which means that if I'm only saying things proudly, even if I'm saying the truth in a very proud manner, then the heavenly wisdom and the very heavenly source of God will not be recognized by the people who hear me. I must be broken in order for me to be able to preach on the authority of God. You must also be broken for you to receive the very wisdom of God, so that whenever you just have a daily conversation, or you daily teach, or you daily disciple your children, then you are sharing the very wisdom of God. You stand on His authority and not your own. That you as a parent, whenever they are recognizing your authority, it isn't you that they are having to bow a knee to, but it is God Himself and His ways. That is what a parent is supposed to be doing. Okay? But we do not do that unless we are first broken before God Himself, which means that we first need to recognize Jesus as speaking with authority. Again, in verse 18, he says, those who speak on their own authority seeks their own glory. Okay? Whenever we are correcting, whenever we are leading, whenever we are doing whatever it might be, and I know the trap, I know that it's there, that I'm going to say something like, well, I'm the parent, you just better listen to me. It's like, no, we can't say stuff like that. Why? Because it's already self-centered from the word go. We have to say, because God is this, So you need to do this, okay? Is it because God is the one who is living that we must be able to turn and live for Him? We cannot claim our own authority, but we claim the authority only given to us by God, which we do not recognize until we are humbled. And so these people who are seeking their own glory, of Him who sent Him is true, and in Him there is no falsehood. This is where we need to be striving for, is that we are just quite simply striving to be not only humble people, but people who have no falsehood in them whatsoever. Our authority, there is no such thing for a follower of Christ. There's roles of leadership. Yeah, there's this. Yeah, there's that. But we must have the heart of Christ whenever we are actually doing these things. And so he says in verse 19, this was evidently news to them. Has not Moses given you the law, yet none of you keeps the law? Why do you seek to kill me? Okay, the crowd doesn't know that there are people trying to kill him. The crowd doesn't know what is actually going on. So then they respond in verse 20 that the crowd answered, "You have a demon. Who is seeking to kill you? What are you talking about?" And so this is where Jesus is bringing the people. Again, He exasperates the people to make them make a choice. Will you believe in the Son of God, or will you reject them? And this is where humility is ultimately going to flow from us as well. Will you believe that He is the Son of God, or will you reject Him? Are you His brothers who only criticize the ways of the church or the ways of God because you do not believe, or do you believe, and so therefore you are submitting to His ways and the things that He is calling you to? And then so Jesus, they ask, well, who's trying to kill you? So that Jesus can say this in verse 21. I did one work, and you all marvel at it. Moses gave you circumcision, not that it is from Moses, but from the fathers, and you circumcise on the Sabbath. If on the Sabbath a man receives circumcision, so the law of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me? Because on the Sabbath I made a man's whole body well. We'll stop there for a second. If we were to know some of our Old Testament history, we know that Jesus is talking about circumcision, which for a Jewish boy, they were going to be circumcised on the 8th day of their life. And so that was just following the law of Moses. And so now Jesus is putting their religious practices into question. Again, it came from God, came from Jesus, it came from all of this. But now He's questioning their heart behind their religious practices. He's saying again, you guys do this just so you can keep the law. But you're mad at me for making somebody well on the Sabbath? What is your reason for keeping the law in the first place? If you're not worried about heart transformation, then what are you doing it for? If you're not doing it so that you know God, then why would you even do it in the first place? He's just like, because my family did it, and my and my grandparents did it, and so on and so forth. It's just tradition. It's normal. Just let us do it in peace, right? But Jesus is saying, I know your motives behind this, and I know why you're doing this. And it is not pure, and it is not for you to know God Himself. Okay? And so, as He's putting all of this in question, He's correcting their very thoughts or their very opinions that they have already made up about Himself. And this is Him speaking inside of the contents of the book and letting everybody know the plot of the story wasn't what they first thought it was. Okay? But the plot of the story is much better than what their imaginations came up with in the first place. Because they had no idea that they were just keeping religious practices for tradition's sake. And Jesus speaks the truth and wakes them up. Okay? Now, if you guys have done something for many, many years, and then something is being changed, your flesh says, that's about enough of that. I said, we ain't doing it. Okay? I said, quite honestly, that has divided more churches than we can count this morning. But whenever we do submit to God's will, God's direction, because we have spent that time in prayer, of which I've never heard anybody argue for tradition's sake who are prayer warriors. There's always been people who neglect prayer, who neglect being close to the Father. So we can say that. But this is what Jesus, He's now told the people, be more worried about heart transformation than you are about tradition. Okay? And so with that, he says in verse 24, just to kind of help us see everything in perspective, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. Don't judge the cover of the book, or don't judge the book by its cover. Now there's this man, my dad had told me this testimony. He was a missionary in the Amazon for years. Not just 2, not 3, years on end. And so we're talking practically a whole career of being a missionary. Just last year, he was 90-some years old, and he walked the aisle at my mom and dad's church in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And whenever he got to share his testimony, he told everybody, I was a missionary, and I was religious all of my life, but I just met Christ. Okay? And then he was baptized and died a few months later. Okay? Now, God didn't waste, I wouldn't think that he wasted all of his missions or whatever else, but God allowed him to be able to see his whole religious life was just quite simply based on, what he'd been taught his whole life. It wasn't based on him knowing the living Christ. And so, with that, that's really the challenge. You're not saved unless you actually know him. You're not going to heaven unless you actually know him. But even with that, now it puts all the purpose behind the religious things that we do, because now we are practicing these religious things because we know him, and then we know him a little bit more. And that's really the challenge that I'll just leave with you this morning, that we can't just judge by appearances only. Yeah, you're religious, but if Jesus is saying judge with right judgment, well, you get into the contents of his word, and he speaks for himself, and all of a sudden this becomes much more real than what it did before. If that was a conviction that you just had, I'm about to pray, you guys come forward. If you have just been a Christian and you think, I haven't been doing this for the right reasons, well, the altar will be open and we'll pray together. Okay? But even with that, you guys just respond as the Lord leads. Father, I'm very thankful that you speak.